Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of Squid Game 3, the third and final season in the hit Netflix series. That's right, the Squid Game saga, at least in South Korea, has come to an end with this season 3. That was basically just an extension of season 2. We knew that going in. These were two halves, not two complete seasons. And like Squid Game 2, I thought that Squid Game 3 was a mixed bag with some highlights and some stuff that I didn't like as much, along with the added pressure of having to end the show, which is never easy. So let's break down what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I was mixed on. And before we go any further, I just want to let you know I will be going into spoilers. So if you haven't watched Squid Game 3, go finish it and then come back. First of all, regardless of my thoughts on the show or some of the choices that may have been made creatively, I just have to say that the acting from the main cast was top-notch through all seasons. Lee Jung-jae had to do so much as Gi-hun, and this third season brought him down to the pit of despair. It's further than we'd ever seen him go before, and a lot of the first half of this season especially was all nonverbal acting, and I think he did a great job of playing a man who's just completely broken. This show would have been way less compelling without him in the lead, and my opinion of him as an actor is completely unaffected by my thoughts on some of the creative choices that they made during the story. This season specifically, I also liked Kang A-shim as Gyum-ja, the older woman who was forced to ultimately kill her son. The speech that she gives Gi-hun right before her suicide is the turning point for his character, and she brought so much pain to her role. Im Si-won's character journey as Myung-gi, or as I prefer to still call him, MG Coin, wasn't that clear on the page, but I think he did a really good job with the material that he was given, building on his insecurity and conflict from the last season. And Jeon Seok-ho really got more to do this season on the mainland as Woo Seok investigating the captain's background and also providing some levity to the show. I really didn't have an issue with any of the performances in this series, apart from one group, which would be the VIPs. Squid Game 2 seemed to be setting up a reckoning for the VIPs, and I mentioned that it was odd that we didn't see them at all in the last season, but when they did show up this season, I don't think they really brought anything to the table. And I thought that a lot of the acting wasn't great, partially because most or all of them were overdubbed in post-production, and I didn't think that their dialogue was either written or performed particularly well. The VIPs are kind of the real big bad on this show, and they didn't do anything that interesting, nor did they really play into the finale. I don't think that Squid Game ever really used them to their full potential, especially in this season 3.
Whoa, someone is climbing back up!
That's 456.
One thing that I thought was a substantial improvement on season 1 was the game element of the show. I liked the games in Squid Game 2, and I also thought that the ones in part 3 were really strong. Simple, but suspenseful. The jump rope challenge was really great. It kind of combined the glass panel bridge element from season 1 with having this massive metal rope spinning around, waiting to knock you off the bridge to your death. I thought that hide and seek was really cool with its endless labyrinth of hallways and stairs and locked doors. I mean, I felt physical anxiety just at imagining myself having to run through that challenge, not knowing if a murderer was around the next corner. And the concept of the final Squid Game on those big towers with the poles to push people off, I thought was a really good idea. I just wasn't sure about the execution. If we were judging season 2 and season 3 versus season 1 just based on the games and their design, then I think these two seasons were a big improvement. But when I went back and looked at my Squid Game 2 review again to kind of refresh myself, I said that I hoped that the series wasn't becoming like Saw, where the traps and the games were the most interesting part of the show. And I do feel like that's ultimately what happened. The in-game sequences where they're playing were mostly great, but everything surrounding it had some issues. My main question about Squid Game 2 a few months ago was how the storylines would be resolved. And I don't think that Squid Game 3 paid off a lot of them very well. Let's start with Jun-ho, who spent most of Squid Game 2 on a boat looking for the island, and most of Squid Game 3 still on a boat looking for the island. The sheer amount of screen time that this story got was pretty crazy because it mostly literally went nowhere. But I was still on board because I wanted to see the payoff, and it ended with Jun-ho seeing his brother for about 30 seconds, asking one question, and then never getting an answer. I mean, this is what everything was building to. And to top it off, the character's ending is getting to raise a baby he didn't ask for and being given the prize money from the last Squid Game, which is literal blood money. I mean, I can buy that he might be happy about this baby, but it's kind of hard for me to believe that he could live with himself if he took this money that was bought by human lives in the course of a game that he just spent a big chunk of his life trying to stop. I think that this showdown between two brothers had the makings of a great story, but it didn't pay off at the end. Noel was also a big storyline with a lot of screen time, and she devoted most of this season to saving player 246, the dad of the sick girl that she knew from the theme park back in season 2. That is a noble mission, but again, compared to how much screen time she was given, I don't really think her story went anywhere. I mean, she seemingly found out that her daughter, who she was trying to find in North Korea, was dead, but then at the end she got a call that said maybe she wasn't. Okay, sure, but if she's going to be such a major character, I'd like to at least know more about her. How did somebody who seems so principled justify working as a murder guard in the Squid Games for multiple years? Or why the information about her daughter and the very detailed files that the frontman had about her could have been wrong? When you're wrapping up a story, I feel like you have to pay very close attention to where you're putting your focus. And across the last 2 seasons, Squid Game put so much attention on those 2 storylines that weren't really all that satisfying for me. I think they could have either cut down the overall length of the show or devoted more time to other stories like the conflict between Gi-hun and the frontman In-ho, which I think got very little attention in this 3rd season. I did feel a little vindicated though by one thing. In my Squid Game 2 review, I said that I thought it was obvious that Dae-ho was only pretending to be a former Marine, and I got a lot of comments saying that I just didn't understand what PTSD was or that I was wrong. But sure enough, it turned out that he was actually faking being a former soldier, which I picked up on not just from his reaction during the attempted uprising, but from other little moments in the show. Even if he had been a former Marine or been more brave, I wouldn't have minded him melting down under Gi-hun's death stare, because Lee Jung-jae did a great job of bringing "I'm going to kill you" energy to this character without really having to say a word. In general, a lot of the supporting characters from Squid Game 2 that were standouts took a back seat in Season 3, which I guess isn't that surprising. Hyun-ju got a valiant death by choosing to go back and rescue Gyum-ja and Jun-hee and getting stabbed in the process. Min-soo and Nam-gyu ultimately paid the price for their allegiance to Thanos, and I liked that Min-soo was able to turn the tables and take control to the extent that he was capable of doing. He was a pretty weak guy. But the focus of Season 3, the core question of the series, ties back to debates that were happening back in Season 1, which is, what is the true nature of humanity? Are humans irredeemably cruel, or are they still capable of kindness and sacrifice? And it's a great big question. It's one that's been asked in culture, through art and literature and entertainment before. And my issue isn't with the question or with the answer, but how the show ultimately got to it. As I mentioned, Squid Game 2 began with Gi-hun devoted to ending the Squid Game forever and bringing down the VIPs behind it, but that kind of faded as we got into Season 3, and it became more about this ideological difference between Gi-hun and the frontman. And if you're going to do that, that's fine, but I thought that we needed a lot more between those 2 characters in the final season. I mean, they came face to face for about a minute, and they didn't really say much, even after In-ho dramatically did the reveal that he was secretly Gi-hun's greatest ally in this second game. I liked the idea also of giving Gi-hun the choice to kill all the other players and win the game, and that In-ho had been given that same choice by the chairman and done it, presumably leading to his role as the frontman. But for that to be the crux of the major decisions made in the show, I think we needed more of that background and less of all of the other stuff that didn't really pay off. Give Gi-hun and In-ho a meaningful interaction after the big reveal. Show us more of In-ho's journey, more parallels between him and Gi-hun, and maybe some actual suspense as to whether Gi-hun is going to walk down that same path. He decides not to do that almost immediately after remembering his past interactions with Se-byok in Season 1, and I liked that callback, but I think that these 2 seasons could have been much more compelling if the driving force behind them was the attempted corruption of Gi-hun. He does, of course, eventually sacrifice himself in order to prove that humans can be good, despite ample evidence to the contrary. And it's not his choice that I mind. It fits what we know of the character. It's that the show decided to use a literal baby as the mechanism for that choice. If you asked people on the street or anywhere really what the most evil act you could possibly do is, I would imagine that kill a baby is probably pretty high up there. I mean, that's why I never for a second doubted what Gi-hun was going to do, because there's no circumstance where his character would do that. My pitch would have been to not kill Jun-hee earlier in the show or even have her give birth, but to keep her alive and under Gi-hun's protection until the very end, making his choice between his own life and a new life a little less on the nose. I think we could have seen some actual temptation culminating in that ultimate sacrifice, but ending his life to protect the, let's be honest, CGI baby was obviously what was going to happen as soon as it was decided that that baby was going to compete. And I thought that it made the ending feel anticlimactic. Part of that was also that I don't think that the last game in particular was written very well. MG Coin's heel turn was way too sudden. I mean, he went from offering himself as a sacrifice to save his pregnant ex in order to save her life in episode 1 to saying that he was just going to throw that baby off the cliff for the money in episode 6. Now, you can get a character there, but I think it has to be pretty clear how they arrive at that destination. And I didn't buy his reasoning. Why all of a sudden did he want to get rid of the baby? If it was about money, I think that he could have won the game with the baby and just gotten all of the money. I mean, the baby's not going to take it. And if he didn't want the baby, I think it's a very poor tactic to tell Gi-hun, hey, you know what? Give me that baby so I can drop it over the edge. I think he would have stood a much better chance by playing it cool and probably could have talked Gi-hun into sacrificing himself anyway and then ditching his cartoon baby if he wants to. Again, it comes down not to the situation, but how the show put the characters in that situation. I also found the way that we got to Gi-hun, MG Coin, and the cartoon baby being the only 3 left pretty contrived. I actually liked how the alliance began to turn on itself and how Gi-hun manipulated them in those first 2 rounds. But as the players dwindled, we had player 100 pushed off the platform because MG Coin decided to make his heel turn. And then player 39, the lunchbox, commits suicide just to make things more dramatic. I just didn't buy it, and it made the final game feel forced from a writing standpoint, which I think undercuts the series as a whole quite a bit. Unless you're watching a snuff film or a movie from some European director that people in their 20s love, if a movie or show poses the question, are they going to kill this baby? 99% of the time, the answer to that question is no. It actually reminds me of one of my favorite Simpsons jokes.
Yeah, right, Pops. No jury in the world's gonna convict a baby. Maybe Texas.
It's such an easy way out of what could have been a much more morally complex scenario. Following Gi-hun's death, we do get some wrap up with our major characters. The island is blown up, and all the guards and VIPs pay the price for their murderous actions over the years. Just kidding, they all get away consequence-free, and perhaps the most realistic choice this season. And we end the series with In-ho delivering Gi-hun's remaining prize money and, bizarrely, his still blood-soaked uniform to his daughter in America. And it seems that Gi-hun's sacrifice has humbled him and truly brought an end to the Squid Game once and for all. Until he drives by an alley in Los Angeles and sees none other than multiple Oscar winner and acclaimed Hollywood actress Cate Blanchett recruiting a man for what I presume to be the upcoming American spin-off of Squid Game. And the series ends with almost everyone that we know and love dead, nobody behind the game actually punished, and the prospect that the misery of this Squid Game competition will continue globally forever. Now, listen, I've seen South Korean movies and shows before, so I'm not saying that a downer ending is out of character, but it does make Gi-hun's sacrifice feel a bit, empty, and maybe that's the intention. But combined with the issues that I had with other elements of these last 2 seasons, it did make the end of the show feel unsatisfying. And looking back at it now, maybe it'll change over time. That's kind of how I feel about the Squid Game series overall. When you look at all 3 seasons, it was a well-acted show with some incredible iconography, some great hateable villains, inventive and imaginary game design and execution, and some really good ideas that just wasn't able to pull it all together in the end. And it's far from the first time that something like this has happened to a story that starts off great, but it doesn't make it any less disappointing because I'd love to see that quality go all the way through. Season 1 will always stand as a great season of television, And I think that seasons 2 and 3 also have a lot of upside. It wasn't all bad. And you have to remember that Squid Game was a surprise success back in 2021. The creator of the show openly said that he didn't initially have plans for any kind of sequel. Now, I'm sure that Netflix is thrilled that he was able to come up with 2 more seasons, but I think the dilemma that many fans of the show are facing, myself included, is whether the good parts of seasons 2 and 3 were worth the parts that were kind of a letdown. Gi-hun's mission at the end of season 1, a lot like Neo's at the end of The Matrix, was to find and take down the overlords of a corrupt system, and that was a great idea in theory. Now it's up to viewers around the world to decide whether that reality was really worth it. So those are my thoughts on Squid Game 3 and really the Squid Game series overall. What did you think? Were you happy with the resolution? Did you think that the character arcs tracked better? Did you like the side stories better than I did? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching me here on the channel. Be sure to stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Tomorrow, when the embargo lifts, I will have my review of Jurassic World Rebirth, and we'll be here breaking down box office on Tuesday morning. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.